Hi all, that was the incomparable David Coverdale and a song going out to Jenna, a future THI and TPC disciple. Right, we've got the usual stuff in tonight's show, some announcements, but we're going to go into the first thing that I need to say is the outcome of this fake lockdown has determined the paths of many, altered the thinking of many, and altered the focus of many. And some used it for positive purposes, but sadly many used it to reinforce their desire for the old slavery system, mired in a nanny state mindset, and for it to continue. But as we go into a new phase, and we're in it, it is important we reassess where we stand in the process. Could I or we do better? Do I or we need, what do we need to work on? What is my focus? In a world of turmoil, the key is how you focus and what you focus on. Is the focus about other people, politics, or drama? Those in most cases are distractions and avoidance of the real focus. This whole charade was designed to throw people off track, and some in our group have fallen for their game and not played our or their own. Nothing has changed in the bigger scheme of things. Things are still playing out, and the clowns will still try and fail. Our role is to focus on preventing them spinning things out and delaying the real change which they wish to avoid. The key now is for all to regroup, recharge and double our efforts to shorten the time of the old system, to light up your beacons and give the dark forces and old system clowns a strong message. But imagine if there was a lockdown for stupidity. Imagine if there was a vaccine against stupidity. Imagine if there was an app for stupidity. Would there be, or would we notice many changes than currently? But imagine if there was an app for karma, how suddenly things would change then. But then the question would be, why can't you self-regulate your own behaviour? And imagine if there was an app for service to others, how different things would be. Right, let's get into the show, and we do have some intel tonight, including one fairly powerful piece. And exposure, and we will continue to shine a light on the cockroaches amongst us. But what I've been pleased to see, something I called for in an earlier show, is many activists now are stationed outside of clown and authority figures' homes and shaming them. All I ask is please don't react violently. We don't need that. Your presence is enough to make them uncomfortable. And for the first time in their lives, they are being made uncomfortable and accountable for their actions. My suggestion is go and stand outside the news readers' homes. They are the key to bringing those idiots down. Last Saturday, I had a great time and did another Polish TV recording with some members of the Polish group, and I want to say a special thanks to Stanislaw and Jolante for arranging it all. Now, they asked a variety of questions, and it was a more flowing conversation than the first one, as there was no translations from my replies, and that is being done separately and prepared with subtitles for the up-and-coming video, which is expected to be out this week. Another show is being arranged with them sometime this month, and I'm also being requested to do a show for THI Germany as well. Coming up this weekend, Saturday or Sunday evening, I will be doing another THI Expose show, and it will be at 7:30 p.m. Unfortunately, I'm tied up Saturday afternoon and also Sunday afternoon, so it will be an evening show, and it will be added to the must listen to show section. There are also 3 and possibly 4 more must listen to shows that are in the pipeline currently, but this one was date sensitive and will go out first. THI Texas, having done a brilliant presentation and charted their path on their projects, are now ready for launch, and as of Wednesday have now launched TPC Texas as an official business. They in part have some of their own funding, and the TPC will be available for small donations to help them, and I'm sure we all wish them all well. Right, that's the announcements out the way, and we'll get into some news pieces. There is a recurring theme about the news, as you'll find out throughout the show. There's only 3 news items, or 3 topics. But this one is the new chief of the US Federal Media Agency, who was a Trump appointee, was sacked. Has sacked 3 senior officials, raising fears that next networks will be politicised. They couldn't get any more political than they are now. But Michael Pack, a conservative filmmaker and former associate of ex-White House advisor Steve Bannon, clan, has also begun to install Trump loyalists at the agency. The firings are being criticised by liberals and some conservatives, and Mr. Pack has defended his actions as transitional steps that any leader of an organisation would take. Now, the US Agency for Global Media, I don't think many people will be aware that that actually exists, is a taxpayer-funded body that oversees global broadcasters, including Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Asia, and Middle East Broadcasting. Sounds like a Langley operation to me. But the USAGM is tasked with broadcasting independent news to a global audience of more than 280 million people, and it was created in 1942, said to combat Nazi propaganda. Now, the director of Voice of America, Amanda Bennett, and her deputy, Sandra Sugawara, resigned on Monday after Mr. Pack was confirmed by the Senate, and the heads of Radio Free Europe, Asia and Middle East, as well as the Open Technology Fund, sounds like open source, were ousted on Wednesday. Now, Mr. Pack has not offered public details on why these individuals were fired, but President Donald Trump had recently criticised Voice of America, calling its reporting disgusting and accusing it of spreading propaganda in favour of China. Now, the leaders of Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty and Middle East, Jamie Fly and Alberto Fernandez, were both appointed during Mr. Trump's presidency, and Mr. Fly was a former advisor to the Republican Senator Marco Rubio, while Mr. Fernandez was a former ambassador. Is this finally a sign of fighting back against the media, or will the big guys be left to spew their propaganda? One has to wait and see. The UK government is planning to relax its travel quarantine rules in early July for some countries, it has announced this week, and UK officials are talking to their counterparts in Portugal, France, Italy, Greece and Spain. However, the UK hopes to make an announcement this week that it has secured a number of travel corridors, as they called it. Now, the government had previously said that the quarantine would be reviewed every 3 weeks. Makes a change from 2 weeks. And that June 29 marks the end of the first 3-week period. Now, a travel corridor would mean that two people travelling in both directions between two countries would not have to self-isolate after they travel. And the first travel corridors could come into force on July the 4th, although that date has not yet been confirmed. And it said even if certain routes are exempt, the travel quarantine for people arriving from other destinations will remain in place. And a senior aviation source told the BBC that the quarantine could remain throughout the summer for anyone arriving from countries which do not have a travel corridor with the UK, one of which is America. And this is utter drivel and essentially it's faction fighting games, in my opinion. We covered this particular clown group a few weeks ago. The Swiss pharmaceutical giant Novartis has agreed to pay more than $642 million to settle a lawsuit which accused it of paying kickbacks to doctors, amongst other allegations, according to the US Department of Justice. Now, part of the settlement pertained to the company's use of 3 foundations to funnel payments to cover costs for patients taking its multiple sclerosis drug called Gilenya and the kidney cancer drug Afinitor. Another part centred on alleged bribing of doctors to prescribe the company's medication. That's not a one-off, they're all doing it. And through this settlement and others, the government has demonstrated its commitment to ensuring that drug companies do not use kickbacks to influence certain drugs described by or prescribed by doctors or purchased by patients, according to the US Attorney General, Jodie Hunt, or Assistant Attorney General. Now, Novartis is accused of having hosted tens of thousands of speaker programs and events which the Department of Justice said were used to bribe physicians. No surprise there. Your life in their hands? I think not. This is a major concern now, and according to newly released data from Princeton, it's funny how to use Langley-based universities for figures, a bit like Johns Hopkins. And this data was released from Princeton's University Eviction Lab, and was one of the first places in the country to post what is quite concerning eviction numbers in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is up 37% on last year. In Columbus, Ohio, eviction hearings are taking place in a convention centre in order to accommodate the number of cases and also adhere to social distancing guidelines. In North Carolina, a 9,000 case backlog is set to resume last week. In Michigan, State Court Administrative Office estimated when its moratorium comes to an end at the end of June, 75,000 evictions will be filed. In New York City alone, a coalition of advocates estimated that 50,000 evictions will be filed once Governor Andrew Cuomo's statewide moratorium ends. And according to Emily Benfer, who is a visiting professor of law at Columbia University and a former housing lawyer, says the eviction was always too high in this country, but these are extreme numbers. The United States can expect an avalanche of evictions, and it will negatively impact entire communities. We will be recovering from that for generations to come without federal intervention. Well, you're wasting your time waiting for the Fed or federal to intervene in anything, because they've never done nothing for this country. And a week after Kansas City officially opened its courts, Tamika Cole was due to appear to make her case to a judge that she'd be allowed to stay. And unfortunately, like most people, she had no lawyer and only her own documentation, her own version of events, and some advice she got from a tenants' rights non-profit organisation. Now, she said she suffers from respiratory issues, and the eviction courtrooms are on the 7th floor of a building that only has one consistently functioning elevator, and is hearing over 100 cases per day, making it unclear how effectively social distancing would be maintained. But she had no choice in order to keep a roof over her head, and she had to go, and once she did, she was almost certainly going to lose. A study of eviction court outcomes in Kansas between 2006 and 2016 showed that over 99% eviction cases went against the tenant. That's another program that Dave created and won't be able to fix either. A US soldier has been charged in the past week with terrorism offences for planning a deadly ambush on his unit by sending information to a neo-Nazi group. Ethan Meltzer, 22, stands accused of sending sensitive details about his unit to the Order of the Nine Angles. Interesting name. The US Department of Justice calls it an occult-based neo-Nazi and racially motivated violent extremist group. And he was allegedly planning for information to be passed to jihadists who would then carry out an attack. Now, his plan was thwarted late last month by the FBI and the US Army, and he was eventually arrested on June the 10th. But Mr. Meltzer has been charged with conspiring and attempting to murder US nationals, conspiring and attempt to murder military service members, providing and attempting to provide material support to terrorists, and conspiring to murder and maim in a foreign country. Now, he enlisted in the US Army in December of 2018 and began his active service in June 2019. And he has allegedly attempted to orchestrate a murderous ambush on his own unit by unlawfully revealing its location, strength and armaments to a so-called neo-Nazi anarchist white supremacist group. He is accused of planning to provide information intended to be conveyed to jihad terrorists, and he allegedly exchanged communications regarding passing information about an anticipated deployment of his unit to a purported member of Al-Qaeda. Now, member of the Order of Nine Angles, or is it Nine Angels, or Circle of Nine, also known as O9A, have expressed admiration, it is said, for Nazis such as Adolf Hitler, Islamic jihadists such as Osama bin Laden, according to the statement. Now, due to profiling in the military and agencies, this is not a one-off event, and they have many more of these types of mind-controlled candidates. We're off to Gotham now. And the shootings in New York City has increased a massive 358% over the last 7 days compared to the same time last year. And the skyrocketing numbers have prompted the police commissioner to warn the worst is yet to come. There were 12 shootings during the 7-day period, whilst in 2020 there has been 55. And more than 70 people were wounded in the 55 shootings, with at least 19 injured on Saturday alone, when the city saw over a dozen incidents, most of which occurred in the Bronx. Now, in one of these incidents, a man died after being shot in the neck while washing his car. And he said it takes a long time to turn a ship that sees an iceberg directly in front of us, according to the New York Police Commissioner Dermot Shea, adding that the numbers have been trending upwards for a while and that he had warned of a storm on the horizon back in December of last year. Clearly, the authorities in New York and the clown operators at the top, like Cuomo and de Blasio, fake name, are not really interested. They're too busy promoting fake bills and trampling all over the people. And Shea said that NYC had seen 100 shootings in May, and it's the first time the city had hit that number in around 5 years. Now, the latest figures comes only a week after Shea ordered the disbanding of an anti-crime unit which saw plainclothes police officers stopping individuals and searching for weapons. And that is the effort of that is at reform was sparked by nationwide protests following the killing or alleged killing of George Floyd. You see, this is the Ouroboros program, or problem reaction solution. They want a solution. They wanted more violence, and so they generate an interest, and let's make cutbacks, let's make reforms. You'll see why later. So Shea said that the tactic of stop, question and frisk deployed by the unit was too dated and was harmful to communities of colour in that it eroded trust between the police and the citizens. I am proud of what they did, but we made mistakes, he concluded. Now, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio has also addressed the uptick in violence and the controversy of disbanding the anti-crime unit, saying the city was not going back to the bad old days where there was too much gun violence. Well, it just has, you jackass. You know, these people are beyond stupid. Nor was it going back to the bad old days of worsening the situation with bad police tactics to deal with it. Well, it's up to the politicians to create an environment within the police, is it not, that is conducive to harmony with the citizens. So turning around and saying going back to the bad old days of bad police tactics, why in the many decades, and it has been decades where the police are getting worse, mainly because they're being sent to do Israeli tactics, military tactics. Where's the correlation between the two? Because the people can see it, that the police have got worse since they've been sent to Israel for training. Why didn't he and all the others mouthpieces stop it? Now, I would like to say it was just a coincidence that the shootings increased, but it's not. And this is how the clowns running that state reacted to it. And so here's the solution. Just rolls from one to another. Allegedly because of facing pressure, which is a load of rubbish in and of itself. Allegedly they were given a script, not facing pressure, from thousands of constituents calling to defund the police, New York City this week slashed $1 billion from the police budget. Now, some city lawmakers and the protesters calling for change think the cuts weren't sweeping enough. Really? And the City Council approved $88.9 billion for the 2021 budget late on Tuesday, while hundreds of protesters, many of whom were paid, have camped outside the City Hall for a week, waited to hear the results. Now, the New York Police Department is the largest force in the US and employs over 55,000. And the department budget was almost $6 billion for 2020. Now, the approved budget includes nearly $484 million in cuts and will reallocate $354 million to, quote, other agencies, unquote, who it is said were best positioned to carry out the duties that have previously been assigned to the New York Police Department. Like the Department of Education, they said, really. The Department of Health and Mental Hygiene and the Department of Homeless Services. And another $162 million was slashed through associated costs, the council said in a statement. We'll tell you why that was all done shortly. There's been a scientific discussion and a paper put out on the 2 meter 6 feet rule, and it's now been stated it has no basis whatsoever in science, according to leading scientists. I've said to the government that comes under increasing pressure to drop the measure. Now, there was a report in the Telegraph in the UK of Professors Carl Hennigan and Tom Jefferson from the University of Oxford, who stated there is little evidence to support the restriction and called for an immediate end to the formalised rules. The University of Dundee also said there was no indication of that distancing at 6 feet is safer than 3 feet. And the intervention comes as two government ministers suggested on Monday that the rule is likely to be relaxed following a review commissioned by Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister. Now, on Tuesday, shops experienced daily footfall drops of 41% compared to the same day last year, while enormous queues built up outside because of these ridiculous social distancing requirements. Now, they examined the current evidence for the 2 metre rule and looked at 172 separate studies cited in a recent review in The Lancet, and found just 5 had dealt explicitly with the coronavirus infection in relation to distance. 5 out of 172. And only one of them mentioned coming within 6 feet of a patient. And that paper showed proximity had no impact whatsoever. So queuing outside shops, dodging each other once inside, and not getting close to other people anywhere, social distancing has become the new norm, they wrote. But the 2 metre rule, however, is also seriously impacting schools, pubs, restaurants, and our ability to go about our daily lives. And much of the evidence, they said, in this current outbreak informing policy is of poor quality. Encouragement and hand washing are what was needed, not formalised rules. Now, the University of Dundee suggested that 78% of risk of infection happens below 1 metre, and there is just an 11% chance of any increased distance making a difference. Mike Lonergan, a senior statistician and who reviewed 25 papers compiled for the World Health Organization, said, "Our conclusion is that avoiding contact is very important, and that a 1 metre distance might be slightly better than just avoiding contact, but the difference is unlikely to be much." And these data gave no indication that 2 metres is better than 1. Just happens to be the same depth that we get buried at, which is exactly what they're trying to do. Now, on Monday, the Isle of Man became the first area of Britain to relax the 2 metre rule, saying businesses will no longer be required to implement social distancing and employees can return to work as usual. Now, the island's chief minister said, "I'm sorry we had to come between you and a hug, and I'm glad today that we can give people their hugs back." Now, the government in the UK has promised to review social distancing before pubs and restaurants reopen in July, amid concerns that many businesses will not be profitable if it remains in place. And the chief executive of the British Independent Retailers Association said onlookers should not be fooled by the long queues and warned that 1 in 10 independent businesses may not ever reopen. Which is echoing what we said in our show. Where are we next? Final thing on the virus nonsense is despite that report, and there's been several other reports of saying it's not of any value, the 3 corrupt states launched this new directive in the past week. New York, no surprise, New Jersey, no surprise, and Connecticut, even less of a surprise, have asked people travelling from states where virus cases are rising, which is a lie, to go into self-isolation for 14 days. And New Jersey's Phil Murphy said people in the 3 states have been through hell and back and did not want another round of virus infections. And some southern and western states have been reporting record numbers of cases, which is a lie. The University of Washington predicts 180,000 US deaths by October, or 146,000 if 95% of Americans wear masks. Yeah, right. And so far the US has recorded more than 2.3 million cases of the virus, which is actually the flu, and more than 121,000 deaths, which is in line with the flu deaths. And currently those states are Alabama, Arkansas, Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Washington, and Utah, who have to self-isolate for 14 days, according to the governor of New York State, Andrew Cuomo, him again. Now, people coming from those states, including returning New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut residents, will be asked to quarantine upon arrival for 14 days, and anyone found breaking the quarantine could face fines of $1,000, rising to $5,000 for repeated violations, according to Mr. Cuomo. And he added that US states would be added or taken off the quarantine list depending on the number of new cases per 100,000 people or the rate of positive tests. 80% of positive tests have been proven to be false. Oops. The next section is, having covered the virus, the next section is money shortage news. And there have been 2 reports in the UK this past week of the police calling out and arresting criminals in the past month. One is a 700 plus arrest of top figures in organised crime involving drugs and prostitution, and the second is the police calling out banks for systematic crime against customers. And a police commissioner accused the UK's major high street banks of perpetrating serious organised crime against their customers, potentially causing billions of pounds of losses over at least a decade by forging signatures to win court cases and repossessing homes. Now, some people will say, that's great news, and in essence it is. But I'm asking people to exercise caution, because drugs is big money, and the clowns near the top of the money tree need far more money than we do. Like what happened with the drug runners in South and Central America. The trade was moved into America, in some states, and the CIA continued to run it, without the extra cost of middlemen, gangsters and other overheads. And as for the bank issue, remember the Clowns in Panic show. We told you they were wanting to get rid of banks. Central banks in particular, plus other high street banks, in favour of, quote, decentralising, unquote. Because they have the desire for us all to become the bank via our phones and then microchips. And so whilst it's good that the police are calling these people out, but like the drug issue, it appears to me to be a reduction of costs and overheads. Wirecard collapsed on Thursday, owing creditors almost $4 billion after disclosing a gaping hole in its books that its auditor, EY, said was the result of a sophisticated global fraud. Funny these are all coming to light. You'll connect the dots. And the payments company filed for insolvency at a Munich court, saying that with 1.3 billion euros, which is about $1.5 billion of loans due within a week, its survival as a going concern was not assured. Now, Wirecard's implosion came just 7 days after EY, its auditors for more than a decade, refused to sign off on the 2019 accounts, forcing out the chief executive Markus Braun and leading it to admit that $2.1 billion of its cash probably didn't exist. Oh my. Bit like the Federal Reserve, and we're going to add 500 billion and 1.1 trillion. Doesn't exist. And they said that there are clear indications that this was an elaborate and sophisticated fraud involving multiple parties around the world. And he also went on and said that creditors predictably have scant hope of getting back the €3.5 billion that they are owed, and sources familiar with the matter said of that total, Wirecard had borrowed $1.75 billion from 15 banks and issued $500 million in bonds, which are now junk, despite the Federal Reserve trying to release more of them. It's junk. No one's buying them. They said the money's gone, and he said we may recoup a few euros in a couple of years, but we'll write off the loan now. Now, Coatue Management and 9 other hedge funds likely earned more than €1.5 billion this week, having placed bets against Wirecard. So they knew this is a systematic fraud where they're just harvesting off other companies, and again it proves the Clowns in Panic, where they're siphoning off and shutting down the lower end businesses. This is probably the first, and it won't be the last. So they made Coatue Management and 9 other hedge funds made $1.5 billion on bets against Wirecard, and it collapsing. Now, Wirecard shares crashed to €2.5 from 104.5 the previous week on Thursday, before the company revealed a $2.1 billion hole in its accounts. And that has landed Coatue Management, the hedge fund with the largest short position, a $271 million or million euro profit on deliberately knocking out a competitor. And this is what they're doing. Now, shorting a stock involves borrowing it from an institutional investor such as a pension fund. Go figure. Where have we heard that recently? Selling it and then buying it back to return to the investor when the shares have fallen, and then pocketing the profit. That's how part of the stimulus check was paid. Altogether, the 10 hedge funds have made hundreds of millions between the company announcing its mammoth accounting hole on June the 18th and Thursday of last week, when it applied for insolvency, and the shares crashed 97% in the 1 week. Now, London-based TCI had made a profit of €173.6 million, while Marshall, Wace and Greenvale made $146 million and $110 million respectively. But this, like other alleged hackings that we've covered in recent shows, is out and out money stealing and laundering by the clowns. And here's another example of that statement, and this is about the 6th stolen or hacked report that we've had in the show since April, proving yet again their lack of funds. A leading medical research institution working on a cure for COVID-19 has admitted it paid hackers $1.14 million ransom after a covert negotiation was witnessed by the BBC News. The Netwalker criminal gang attacked the University of California, San Francisco on June the 1st, and IT staff unplugged computers in a race to stop the malware spreading. But after an anonymous tip-off enabled BBC News to follow the ransom negotiations in a live chat on the dark web. Why is BBC News on the dark web, and which rogue elements are giving them this information? Or are they involved in it? So cybersecurity experts say these sorts of negotiations are now happening all over the world. Interesting. Sometimes for even larger sums against the advice of law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, Europol and the UK's National Cyber Security Centre. Now, Networker alone has been linked to at least 2 other ransomware attacks on universities in the past 2 months. And at first glance, its dark web homepage looks like a standard customer service website with a frequently asked questions tab, an offer of a free sample of its software, and a live chat option. But there's also a countdown timer ticking to a time when the hackers either double the price of their ransom or delete the data they have scrambled with malware. So what was happening is that you were instructed to log in either by email or a ransom note left on a hacked computer screen, and UCSF was met with the following message on June the 5th. 6 hours later, the university asked for more time and the details of the hack to be removed from the Networkers or Netwalkers public blog. But they noted that the University of California, San Francisco made billions a year, and so then the hackers demanded $3 million. So a university that makes billions a year. Does that sound right to you? But the UCSF representative who may have been an external specialist negotiator explained the coronavirus pandemic had been financially devastating for the university and begged them to accept $780,000. But after a day of back and forth negotiations, UCSF said it had pulled together all available money and would pay $1.02 million, but the criminals refused to go below $1.5 million. Hours later, the university came back with details of how it procured more money and a final offer of $1.140 million. And the next day, 116.4 bitcoins were then transferred to NetWalker's electronic wallets and the decryption software sent to UCSF. Now, according to UCSF, is now assisting the FBI with its investigations while working to restore all affected systems. And it told BBC the data was encrypted is important to some of the academic work we pursue as a university serving the public good. Therefore, we made the difficult decision to pay some portion of the ransom, approximately $1.14 million, to the individuals behind the malware attack in exchange for a tool to unlock the encrypted data, which was created by Langley and the NSA, and a return of the data obtained. Does that story sound valid to you? No, it doesn't to me either. Same clowns, just harvest the money off everything and everyone. And then we get this story. Same thing, same bollocks. The federal government sent $1.4 billion in coronavirus stimulus money to nearly 1.1 million dead people. Really? According to Congress Independent Watchdog Agency, and the finding was part of a report from the Government Accountability Office examining the federal government's coronavirus relief spending in March and April. And it comes as lawmakers weigh another round of stimulus funding while the economy struggles to recover from the coronavirus-induced recession. They haven't paid the last round yet. They haven't even paid 50% of it, despite stealing funds from the Social Security and the pension fund. You know, you're telling me that the database is not up to date, that you're going to send checks to 1.1 million dead people. Now, the watchdog agency said that the payments to dead people came during the first 3 rounds of stimulus checks. In other words, they wouldn't get cashed. Look, we sent all these checks out, and 1.1 million was to dead people. Do you think we're all stupid? Now, the CARES Act directed stimulus checks of up to $1,200 to be sent to individuals who filed taxes in the last 2 years and made less than $99,000 a year, and families were eligible for more money. And the GOA found that the Treasury Department and the Internal Revenue Service did not use government death records to exclude deceased individuals from receiving a stimulus check, in part because of a legal interpretation the agencies were operating under. Do you believe that? The Treasury, hello Munchkin, IRS run by the Rothschilds. They're pulling the wool over our eyes with this BS. While the IRS has access to death records kept by the Social Security Administration, the Treasury and the Bureau of Fiscal Service, which actually sent out the checks, apparently does not have any records. The country's being run by complete retards and jackasses. And the IRS in May said on its website that payments to dead people must be returned to the government, but it does not have a plan to recoup the funds. I would take it out of all their staff's pay personally and fire them all for gross incompetence, and the Treasury. So that's some of the evidence, and here's more of the evidence. Two more before we go into a summing up and a music break. Al Gore, UN Secretary General, and others are now demanding a, quote, great reset of global capitalism. That was on June the 25th. And they said these are truly dangerous times for those who support individual liberty and free markets. Yeah, right. And at a meeting hosted by the highly influential World Economic Forum, powerful officials from non-profits, government, business, academia, labour unions and activist groups announced their plan for a great reset of global capitalism. And it is a proposal they acknowledge has only been made possible because of the opportunity provided by the economic destruction caused by the coronavirus. Problem, reaction, solution again, you see. Now, supporters and attendees of the meeting included helicopter head, Prince Charles, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, AJ Banga, CEO of MasterCard, Bernard Looney, does he play tunes? The CEO of BP, and Gina Gopinath, the chief economist at the International Monetary Fund. All the same clowns, IMF, really. And the purpose, they say, of the Great Reset isn't merely to enact policies that will lead to additional wealth redistribution, but rather to completely overhaul the world's existing structures and institutions. And in an article published on the World Economic Forum website, Klaus Schwab, the founder and executive chairman of WEF, wrote of the Great Reset and said every country from the United States to China must participate, and every industry from oil and gas to tech must be transformed. In short, we need a great reset of capitalism to enact policies that would lead to wealth redistribution. Oh dear, Mr. Gore. Suddenly it's called wealth redistribution, as you at the lower end of the financial scale are now being harvested by the top end. But it's funny they were not complaining of that whilst he and others was looting the world with his fake climate change program, which only benefits vampires like him and the UN. And what we're seeing here is a split in the faction wars. We warned many of the lower, who thought they were the upper elites, would get pushed out in this next phase of the struggle for control. And now they're panicking. But we the people have to build an alternative, and the TPC is the vehicle to do so. We all don't like the way this world is being run, but we cannot sit back waiting for Q or Trump to do something. That is our responsibility, not theirs. And then we got this story this week. There is a new launch by clowns trying to circumvent the new system and their desperate lack of funds, and so they launched their latest money scam called the Q Initiative. Now, I found no evidence directly linking it to Q and Trump, but it would certainly confuse many trying to part with their funds thinking it was related. It's just another crypto-based scam that followed the RV, dinar, sims and dongs currencies being traded in for stable currencies on the promise those devalued currencies would rise exponentially. It's the same promise, it's the same program, and the same scam. Just collecting your dollars, your pounds and euros for fresh air tokens to keep them running a little bit longer. That's all. But then in their manifesto of this Q initiative, it confirmed what our show has been saying for a while, that the money pot is dwindling. Listen closely to this next sentence. They stated the world's total economic activity is around 100 trillion US dollars. Now recently, last 2 years or even year, it was $123 trillion. GDP, global GDP. Well, perhaps the DOD misplaced another $23 trillion. Who knows? But here is the key line in their words. The total amount of money in the world is between 40 and 90 trillion, depending on the definition of what is money. So we've gone from a global GDP of 123 trillion down to 100 trillion, but they've only got 40 to 90 trillion in the pot. So there's not enough to go around. And this is why they were forced into drastic measures of halting the economy and closing down hundreds of thousands of businesses, along with the hacking we've just reported, and sending checks out to dead people. Like that rarely happens. Or fake hacking in universities to acquire 1.14 million. Or the unemployment fraud scam with the, was it Washington State that was in the last show? They're collecting funds because the pot is dwindling. So in the past month, we're now seeing Black Lives Matter, now the Q initiative, which will be followed by another inevitable false flag or major donation type event. And it's all about harvesting everything of what is left from the people. So why are these new hacking and money savings events like police defunding, etc. happening? Well, it proves what we said all along. The money pot is dwindling. And their means of cheating, stealing and laundering has been stifled so much now, they have no other options except the trust. But they don't want the trust. And it appears that will not be released anytime soon, given the trustee was asking for t-shirt and hat donations in a recent broadcast. Although my personal opinion is that it's been set back due to the ongoing split and will not be fruitful until corrected. Time will tell. But they don't want the trust out because their power and control game will be ended with the first dollar out. We know it and they know it. So what they're doing is they're fighting on with a smaller pool of money, hoping for some divine intervention, their gods to come back and save them, or the trustee to quit, of which they've made several attempts against her to do that. All to date have failed. So they are left with a massive problem, because the old system costs tens of billions of dollars per day just to run it. And so now they're in a cost-cutting mode, as we had warned. Banks, police, government, agencies and military are all under threat of severe cuts. Because if money supply is anywhere near the 40 trillion, that means there is only a third of the money available, and so only a third of the programs is going to be run, and only a third of the jobs can be funded. All of which this show has repeatedly warned of, and the trustee told all the so-called higher echelons would unfold since 2016 onwards, including Mr. Trump. The old system is too costly, and now they have to clear up their own mess and reduce costs, all to keep themselves in a game that they've already lost. Oops. Some people like to focus on the negative aspect. Some accuse our show of being negative. But that is a massive victory, largely achieved by the work of this show and also the trustee, Kim. Right, a little bit of intel and then a big piece of intel which is designed to counteract their fun and games. So in the past fortnight, there has been another issue detected with the moon of off-world entities in alignment with on-world clowns firing frequencies again at the planet. Their equipment was destroyed, and the planet has extra shielding now to counter any further attempts. Now, it has been suspected they were trying to install a new version of the Saturn Moon Matrix aligned with the rogue AI. Well, that failed. Keep going, jackasses. So given we've heard about Event 201, and we'll hear it in greater detail in an up-and-coming show about that, here is another operation that these clowns have been up to, called Operation Blackout. And it was a 2019 exercise simulating sabotage of civilian infrastructure, terrorism and psychological operations against American citizens on the day of the 2020 election, which may not take place. My words. The private US-based Israeli-founded company called Cybereason organised it with members of the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI and US Secret Service, and also the law firm Venable. Cybereason is led by ex-members of Israel's military intelligence unit called the 8200, best known for its cyber offences against other governments, and is advised by former top and current officials in both Israeli military intelligence and also our friends, not the CIA. In addition, it is funded and partnered with top US weapons manufacturer and government contractor Lockheed Martin and financial institutions with clear and direct ties to the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the White House advisor and the President's son-in-law Yes, that man again, Jared Kushner. Cybereason CEO Leah Div has openly admitted that he views his work at Cybereason as a continuation of his service to Israel's intelligence apparatus. The Israeli Cybereason has discreetly become a major software provider to the US government and military through its direct partnership with Lockheed Martin, which followed the defense company's decision to open an office at the Israeli military's new cyber operations hub in the Negev desert. The simulation they ran, titled Operation Blackout, was set in a fictional US swing state called Adversaria. It pitted a red team of ethical hackers from Cybereason, academics and security professionals from the private sector, and they were simulating an anarchic group attempts to undermine democratic institutions and systems of government, especially by creating havoc during the election, but apparently not wanting to cancel the election. The team was led by Cybereason co-founder Jonathan Stryam Amit, a former contractor of the Israeli government agencies and a former operative of the elite military Israeli intelligence unit 8200, against a blue team of veteran law enforcement officers from the US Secret Service, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and the Arlington, Virginia Police. The opposing teams were supervised by a white team composed of members of Cybereason staff and Ari Schwartz, a former member of the White House National Security Council and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who set the rules of the simulation and would ultimately decide its outcome. Now, Schwartz also used to work for the Center of Democracy and Technology Department, who is a major backer of Microsoft's Election Guard software. Oops. The Red Team implemented a, quote, a fantastic set of moves that demonstrated daring and creativity, including autonomous vehicles were leveraged to wreak havoc at polling stations and cause many deaths and injuries, unquote. How this is in any way ethical hacking is left unexplained. The Red Team also used false flag operations and psychological warfare. When the Red Team crashed autonomous buses and cars into the polling lines and also polling locations, the Red Team then makes ISIS, a group that's not without ties to the Israeli intelligence, then claim responsibility. Israel's Secret Intelligence Service. Oops, that spells ISIS. Well, I never. In addition, during the simulation, deep fakes were used by the Red Team to impersonate the superiors of pollsters and law enforcement officers and direct them to execute actions that benefited the Red Team. Deep fakes were used to create fake videos and spread misinformation about the candidates in the race, and accounts of media influencers were hacked. Telecom networks and news outlets within the fictitious states were also hacked and flooded with deep fakes aimed at spreading disinformation and panic amongst the US citizens. But, however, in a somewhat curious conclusion, which was to undermine the election but not cancel it, the primary mission of the Red Team failed due to overkill. I guess the AI has learned that the people are not going to fall for their BS anymore. So instead of undermining the election, they forced the blue team to cancel the election, and they caused a terrorist attack. And the exercise concluded that having clear channels of information or disinformation was very important for affecting public sentiment for both sides, including control of social media networks for journalists, influencers, and political figures that allowed the red team to easily spread misinformation through supposedly legitimate channels. And the exercise explicitly excluded hacking election equipment from consideration to focus instead on everything else in the electoral system. Now, Cybereason and unnamed former members of the British government and the Metropolitan Police repeated this simulation on December the 11th, 2019 in what was called Operation Blackout London, using the same fictitious UK city called Adversaria. And it said both teams performed well and deployed a number of tactics and techniques throughout Operation Blackout London. However, in the end, the red team wasn't able to achieve its goals, and the blue team scored a clear victory as they were able to maintain its goals of limiting disruptions and maintaining normalcy and open and free elections. And it said, with many excellent former government and law enforcement experts on my team, we were able to counter Red's moves and maintain public trust, according to Alessandro Talami, a senior director of Cybereason and Operation Blackout London Blue Team leader. Now, the participants in this simulation, and this is how they perfect their false flags, is Ari Swartz, Cybereason, Israel Barak, Sam Curry, Sanat Clough, Johansen Strain, Amit. All of them born too. All of them. And for those who have followed our From Russia with Love series, this type of report will come as no surprise. In fact, we could have forecasted it. And this is exactly how the clowns operate, spending vast fortunes on running sinister plots via computer simulation games that always involves terror. What's wrong with these people? Why is that country and its agency and its rich connections to it always running war and money games designed to kill or harvest the people? Why is there 3.8 billion a year plus given erroneously by the American people funding this type of skullduggery in Israel? Why can't they run scenarios for peace? Why can't they take the many of the Jewish people around the world, numbering 14 to 15 million globally, out of poverty? Because a vast majority of them are in poverty. They won't tell you that in the New York Times. Why are these non-compete companies like Lockheed Martin operating on their behalf? And for those new, Lockheed Martin and several other so-called government contractors, which generally means Langley, get their materials at 50% of cost under a 1976 non-compete agreement signed off by the American government. The light will continue to be shone on these people who are essentially running an off-world program, an old off-world program which failed in 2012. And over time, our show and narrative will be vindicated in this stance. These psychopaths have to be stopped. They may go by the name of Jewish, but these psychopaths care not for the people, whether Jewish or not. They are harvesters and not interested in humanity one iota. Right, fairly explosive intel again now. And a highlight will likely lead to it not taking place. Once it gets out public, it's very hard for them to pull it off. A bit like how we outed Project Bluebeam earlier in the year, and that prevented that nonsense. So this next portion of the show is a selection of news items that all involves one thing: race, and the sheer stupidity of it. And it began with Confederate generals and quickly escalated to Columbus and former US presidents, and now the monument removal crusade has started coming for Jesus, with racial activist Shaun King insisting his depictions are racist propaganda. And he said, yes, I think the statues of the white European they claim is Jesus should also come down. They are a form of white supremacy and always have been. And he also argued that all murals and stained glass windows of white Jesus and his European mother and their white friends should also come down, calling them a gross form of white supremacy, tools of oppression and racist propaganda. Now, the FBI is investigating several recent incidents of racist emails being sent to thousands of affiliates of major institutions, including Harvard, Stanford, Iowa State University, according to multiple reports. Now, around 4,900 individuals with Iowa State University email accounts were sent messages supposedly from Equity Prime Mortgage offering loans to whites only and making racist threats against black individuals. Now, the Harvard Crimson reported Monday that thousands of Harvard-affiliated individuals received the same email, and the Stanford Daily reported that the emails were sent out to 3,600 Stanford University affiliates, and affiliates of the University of Michigan were also targeted. Now, Harold Reed, a media strategist, which is interesting in and of itself, representing Equity Prime Mortgage, told the Harvard Crimson that the company was working with the FBI to investigate the emails which were sent following a compromise of Equity Prime Mortgage systems. What I'm suggesting with these emails that were sent to those organisations, and they were involved in sending them, particularly Harvard and Stanford. We've covered them recently in several shows, and who they are connected to, all designed to escalate it. And then we had Clothhead people. Lincoln County, Oregon, please take a bow, has exempted non-white people from a new order requiring that face coverings be worn in public to prevent racial profiling. So what you're telling me is you can't see a person's black with a mask on. You ever heard such rubbish in all your life? Now, health officials announced last week residents must wear face coverings in public settings where they may come within 6 feet of another individual not from the same household. But people of colour do not have to follow the new rule if they have, quote, heightened concerns about racial profiling and harassment over wearing the masks, according to officials. No person shall intimidate or harass people who do not comply, according to the health officials in Lincoln County, Oregon. With mask requirements becoming more common, activists have raised concerns that the directives could put non-white people in danger. Really. For many black people, deciding whether or not to wear a bandana in public to protect themselves and others from contracting coronavirus is a lose-lose situation that can result in life-threatening consequences either way, according to Renika Moore, director of the ACLU's Racial Justice Program, who then went on to CNN to spout her drivel. And Trevon Logan, who is black, said orders to face or to wear face covering were basically telling people to look dangerous given racial stereotypes that are out there. Well, also rubbish. And then we had this. A white Macy's employee was brutally assaulted by a black man in the middle of a store a few days ago, and video showed that the assailant, Demir Palmer, punching the man in the head as he crawls on the ground, begging for him to stop. Now, the assailant's brother, who filmed the crime and posted it proudly to social media, beggars belief he should be charged for aiding and abetting, in my opinion. These people who stand there filming it, not intervene, made claims that the victim used the N-word. And even if that was true, it wouldn't remotely justify of what was a fairly vicious assault and a felony. But according to all reports, it wasn't true at all, and Macy's investigated and confirmed that the attack was unprovoked, and also that the N-word claim is absurd on its face. And the Macy's employee was not going to casually refer to his black customers as racial slurs. And they said if he had that habit, he would have been fired a long time ago. Now, what actually took place from the looks of it is that Palmer's brother selected a victim based on his race, beat him mercilessly, and then slandered him. They damaged him physically and then tried to ruin his life. And if the hate crime designation has any meaning, it should fit the bill. And yet to this point, no hate crime charges have been filed, nor has there been any public discussions about filing them. Well, this is the latest Macy's assault, not offensive physical contact, due to the attacker's perception of the victim's race. And then we come to this group. And this is, once I've read these few pieces out, you'll see it's organised. This is not random. And this is where I'm coming from. Numerous groups are hunting down, humiliating and ruining the lives of pupils who say a wrong thing, express support for the police, or simply stay silent. And morally illiterate teachers and schools are encouraging it, it is said. But a 16-year-old organiser of Smithtown racist call-out brags about outing peers for making racist comments online in order to prevent them from going to college. Then you know something really scary is going on, and this is organised. The question is, by whom? But it has come to light that there are now numerous groups of teenagers in the United States who are devoted to the project of exposing and humiliating other children whose remarks they perceive as racist or problematic. Anonymous Instagram accounts devoted to calling out racist comments made by fellow students have appeared in the United States, and within a few hours, one such account launched at San Marcos High School in California attracted around 900 new followers. Everything that goes viral means it is a program and is run by the clowns. Everything. And the aim of these students is not only to punish and humiliate, but also to ruin the future prospects of someone who made a racist or alleged racist comment. And they hope that one outcome of their exposure will be to prevent their target from gaining acceptance into the university. Individual would-be vigilantes also joined in the game of outing alleged racist teenagers, and one Instagram account run by a white British male who supports BLM states, "We don't condone racism, DM us any information on these racist thugs." Now, youthful vigilantes, police and social media are often far too ready to interpret people's remarks as evidence of their racism, and all it takes is for a post to be deemed insensitive before those people are all condemned as racist. And invariably what happens is it's calling someone out serves as an invitation to these other private accounts to then mob them like a playground pylon. And children are facing the wrath of these vigilante peers, can easily feel intimidated and socially isolated, according to the school authorities. And Brianna Barry, 16, a student at Catholic Day School in Jacksonville, Florida, was called out for advocating the Blue Lives movement on Instagram and TikTok. Blue Lives. I think that's to do with marine animals. And labelled racist. Now, this teenager, whose dad is a police officer, swiftly became the target of a hate campaign, and she noted that her own friends were commenting that I was a racist and that therefore they could not support her. Things travel fast, they said, and I'm nervous about my address being leaked, she noted, for following a marine program. And then we had a banner that was flown over an English soccer stadium last week, stating 4-0. Oh no, it didn't state that. Well, perhaps it did. But it also stated White Lives Matter, and was condemned by the media, the coaches, the players and the government as racist and inappropriate. And then the bot elements of the public jumped on the bandwagon, as it's safety in numbers with them all condemning it. And there you have it. There is the whole news. 3 main stories: virus, race, and someone stole our money. Oh my. Langley scriptwriters must have been furloughed as well, unless they were redeployed to the various fact-checkers groups all over social media these days. Now, in an up-and-coming show, we will reveal how this mind-controlling events unfold and who does it. But this is what we have warned of in several shows over the past 2 years. They would roll out the racial division card, and the moronic elements of our society have bought into it. not realising they're all running a programme that's going to work against them, not for them. But the very fact that the media is backing it tells you there and then it is a programme the media are running for the clowns and not the people. And the non-thinking people have bought into it, what is quite frankly the most idiotic repeat after me script ever. But apparently white lives don't matter. Apparently yellow lives don't matter. Apparently native lives don't matter. And apparently Hispanic lives don't matter either. Only Jewish and black lives matter is essentially what the increasing idiotic and desperate media and authorities are telling us. And some with a chip on their shoulder jackasses are going along with it. But the Black Lives Matter is another distraction and has all the hallmarks of the Jewish persecution and Holocaust programming. The term Black Lives Matter is an out-and-out racist statement. Nothing more, nothing less. You were the only ones persecuted. Check. We need reparation money. Check. Said reparation money or donations does not go to the peoples. Check. Are you seeing the pattern now? Over 100 million has been collected for Black Lives Matter, and the bulk of it went to the DNC party. Oh, the irony of that. And a giant piss take on the black people who are falling for this rubbish. Remember, the militia arm or military arm of the Democrat Party was called the KKK. Oops. Another organisation said to be against the black people, but were used in a reverse psychology plan to get blacks to hate on the whites. This is how these people operate. That was the programme of the KKK, and I'm not saying by any means that all in that group were following that programme. Because clearly they weren't, because the treatment of blacks in this country up to the 1970s was beyond shocking as an observer from the UK. Anti-black marches, largely made up of women and children, spewing their hatred. White-only faucets, toilets, shops, bars and restaurants was a shame and a blight on this country that has taken a few generations to correct. So if you think my reference between blacks and Jewish is racist or unfair, here is a reminder of why it is not. Judge for yourselves. If these words said over 100 years ago has and is playing out now. This was said by a lead Jewish think tank based person in 1912 called Israel Cohen. We must realise that our party's most powerful weapon is racial tensions. By propounding into the consciousness of the dark races that for centuries they have been oppressed by whites, we can mould them into the programme of the Communist Party. And for those new, communist and communism was created by the Zionist sub-grey group, known today as Jews. But I must stress, not all Jews. And communism is nothing to do with Russia, nothing to do with China, Cuba or Vietnam either. He went on, we will invest to instill in the whites a guilt complex over their exploitation of the Negroes. we will aid the Negroes to rise in prominence in every walk of life, in the professions and in the world of sports and entertainment. With this prestige, the Negro will be able to intermarry with the whites and begin a process which will deliver America to our cause. And there you have it. Hating on people because they're a different colour. Really. And yet this is the same country who shouts the loudest for ET's meet and greet. But if you can't get on with your own species because they're a different colour, why on earth would you wish to meet something that was from another world? More is the point, why would they want to bother to come here? And perhaps the best description for this, for harmony, is based on the humble piano instrument. Whites, are you going to just play the white keys? Or are the blacks only going to play the softer flat tone keys of the black keys? Well, you're not going to play many songs doing that, are you? And the only way to get a beautiful tune out of a piano is to use both sets of keys and create harmony. And it's something we the people need to grasp and follow and tell the racist script writers to go and fuck themselves. Sideways up the jacksie. Final portion of tonight's show. Essentially we covered 3 topics, and as many of you can now see, our shows are largely a confirmation of the information that we've put in our shows ahead of time. There is no news anymore, only a repeat of 3 subjects. 1, the virus and the fake reaction to it. 2 is about organised racial division. And 3, various stories proving they have no funds. And that's it. There is no other or new news. And I guess with the cuts in funding, Langley-based scriptwriters are no longer employed or have run out of narrative. THI has long been the news now, and why we are attacked so much. Not only current news, but news ahead of its time. And this has been proven time and time again. We have forced them, along with other alt media, into a desperate situation of trying to control the narrative. But despite adding new jobs to their armoury like fact checkers, it's just not working. And they're losing control of the narrative badly. A review of any of our past shows will reveal what I've just stated to be correct. In fact, we review lots of information within this show. And perhaps another look at the alt media entity known as Q should be looked at and then held as accountable as our own show. We're all told to trust the plan. But without knowing the plan, what are we trusting? Trust Trump. Fine. But you're asking us to trust a politician. And since when have they been proven to be trustworthy? You're asking for people to be patient and trust you and all will be revealed, when most of what is revealed was revealed years ago. What about now? And the danger is Q is turning into a Drake-style weight club on steroids as we wait for documents, indictments, and the repeat narrative of mass arrests. The same mass arrests narrative that first reared its head by the coven and agency operative known as David Wilcock back in 2002, 18 years ago, under the pseudonym of Art Aqua. 18 years and a mass of different alt-media characters all saying the same thing: mass arrests. But I will ask about why one person of the many who need to be arrested and hasn't, despite Q and QAnon's presenting the evidence of such against this person, and yet he still roams large and amongst us. John Podesta, or correct name, Pedosta. Why has the recently defunded NYPD, many of whom have seen the videos, along with Hillary and Huma Abedin, not been arrested? And I'm not here to denigrate Q, but at some point the plan has to unfold into actions to be valid. And it's something to ponder on. I remember back a few years ago, members complaining, nothing's happening, nothing's going on. And I warned in the first week of 2018, the information in the next phase will be voluminous and we need to get ready for it. It has, and it did. And we don't hear those statements anymore. But let's look back at our shows and the various themes we have brought forth and see how many of you now recognise them in your day-to-day lives. The Ouroboros programme, where the clowns implement one programme that swallows a previous one. The two worlds narrative. Can anyone listening to this not see it now? The statement made a few years back makes far more sense now than to many back then. Immigration of the future will not be country to country, but from their world into ours. We warned of the masks falling, and the old system panicked that much they introduced new masks for people to wear, all designed to put you in fear and dull the throat chakra. We also highlighted and brought forth the shadow and inner work that all of us would be required to do. It was not exactly a new concept, but the drive behind it was. The show pushed you into looking at it and also implementing it, and then went on to the deeper aspects of the personal work. Which has since prevented a number of suicides within our group and Summit Cosmic Voice. Seen dozens drop long-term pharmaceutical drugs, dozens drop recreational drugs, dozens dropped excess alcohol consumption, and an increasing number of people walking away from organised religion. That is the gist of our show. And all of the above has not cost a single dime, just time and effort. The payback I receive is not measured in donations, but me seeing you all improve yourselves. Your understanding and thinking is now on a much higher level than when you first joined. It is that programme that has to be rolled out on a wider scale across countries and the world, as it is that programme aligned with cooperation and togetherness that will change the world once and for all.